Hello, I'm Catherine Bolus, and on behalf of the Tuck Food and Ag Club and the Center for Private Equity and Venture Capital, I'd like to welcome you and thank you all for joining this panel on data and analytics throughout the value chain. I want to get started by both thanking all of the panelists for coming and giving each of them a chance to introduce themselves and their companies. So let's go ahead and start with Gabe.
Hi there, I'm Gabe Sheets-Poling. I've been in agriculture in some form or another most of my career. Most recently, I joined Cloud Agronomics at the end of 2020. I work on strategy, BD, and tech over here. Prior to Cloud, I worked at Indigo Ag for about 3.5 years. I ran the Indigo crop marketplace from zero to about the first billion in transacted grain revenue. I also ran the global markets group and pricing for Indigo. Prior to that, I was at Cargill from kind of the beginning until Indigo. I ran a farmer and rancher facing trading desk, helping farmers and ranchers around the world manage price risk. And I was also CTO of Cargill's regulated swap dealing unit. Will?
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you, Catherine, and nice to see Gabe and Naeem again. My name is Will Wells. I'm the founder and CEO of Hummingbird Technologies, a London-based artificial and remote sensing imagery business. We're now 5 years old, having raised $20 million, and are proud to have 60 of the best data scientists working on the most complex deep learning solutions to try to measure food supply chains from space. And more recently, to try and measure sustainability for verification purposes. I grew up on a farm. My mother's a plant pathologist, and my background before Hummingbird was running a multi-billion-dollar hedge fund, investing in tech companies. So Hummingbird is the unification of everything that matters to me in life, and it's really nice to talk to you guys today.
Very good. So my name is Naeem Zafar. I am an electrical engineer and been starting companies in Silicon Valley since age 26. This is my TeleSense is the company I founded 6 years ago. So this is my 7th company actually. So we've been building companies in Silicon Valley and exiting them. So this is kind of strange for a Silicon Valley to be interested in agriculture. But I think one by one, every industry will be touched by technology, artificial intelligence, and other forms of software. And I looked around when I sold my last company to Oracle, I was looking for what's going to be next big thing. And I knew IoT will be big, Internet of Things. Then I figured out after trying different things that maybe the application biggest one could be agriculture. It's not only impacts people worldwide, but as our population is going to go up from 7.2 billion to 9.1 billion, the arable land, when we grow things, is not going up by 28%. Something has to change. And that's what we are focused on. So TeleSense is focused on post-harvest grain, storage and transport. Can we eke out more profit for the growers by applying some of these machine learning techniques and advanced software and analytics, wireless sensors? So anywhere from reducing grain spoilage to predicting grain spoilage to logistics optimization, right time for merchandising, all the data which necessary is we collecting and making decisions, helping people make decisions. So very nicely complements with Will. Will does broadly agriculture. I'm only in the niche of post-harvest. Good complement here.
Yeah, thanks for that. And to the audience, I would love for the session to be as interactive as possible. And so at the bottom of your screen, just go ahead and ask a question if you have anything, and I will try my best to include them all. So sort of, going back to, I think, what both Will and Naeem mentioned, machine learning, AI, predictive analytics, they're buzzwords almost in any industry these days. And I'd really like to go a little bit more into, what does that actually look like in agriculture? And then, particularly starting with Naeem, I think, what are the key differences to the approach compared to other industries?
I know your internet is a bit choppy, but I understand that. What are the differences between agriculture versus other industries?
Yeah, sort of machine. Yeah.
Yeah. So the thing is that you see, again, I'm only can speak for my area of focus, which is post-harvest grain. Grain never improves in quality once harvested. The question is, at what rate is going to go, spoilage may happen, because it's a living, breathing thing. Mold happens, moisture comes in, rain comes in, biological activity starts, mold start, crud, and could even catch fire. So question is, each storage bin in the world has a unique thermal profile. How the sun hits you. There are 3 silos together. One is getting more sun exposure. It's going to run 4 degrees warmer than the silo behind it, perhaps. Each silo and each storage bin have a unique ventilation profile. How the air comes in, how many ducts, how many J vents. That's going to change how carbon dioxide will be accumulating in the headspace. So we are learning that knowledge. That's machine learning. You apply that to the environmental condition we monitor. You mix that all together to figure out how long before this will go from a number 2 yellow corn to number 3 yellow corn. How many days? Which portion? What decision can I make today? So this is machine learning applied with analytics, applied with data to help you make smarter decisions faster and easier. Don't give me a bunch of data. Tell me to turn on the fans on bin number 8 for 8 hours starting at midnight. Because somebody else has done that analytics, a weather forecast, moisture in the air. So this kind of a knowledge automatically translates to actionable instructions, very useful. You could be in Botswana and get a text message to do that, and you know what to do. That's where we're trying to bring it down. Democratization of the knowledge about your grain.
Just to add there on the AI and agricultural point, I think there are 2 quite key differences when you look at agri-food tech versus other verticals. So unlike something like healthcare tech, the AI in food and agriculture doesn't always have to be perfectly accurate first time. People forget that. It's not like detecting cancerous tumors within an MRI scan, where you really have to be 99.9% accurate. If you're predicting yield mid-season or early season, perhaps 80% is good enough. If you're looking at disease, a high-level sense check might be enough. A lot of what we do over very large areas, the accuracy thresholds kind of become interesting at about 75, 80, 85%. So from an AI perspective, that's a good place to be in. The caveat is that it's incredibly hard to get data, and it's very hard to build up an accurate training set to train your models. So you're exposed to the elements naturally, being in agriculture. But the good side of that is that it doesn't have to be perfect first time. So there's lots of opportunities.
A good point.
I would just touch on, I think one of the big tragedies in agriculture has been a proliferation of data without analytics on top of it, right? So when you talked about sending a text message with a specific instruction, that's a huge leap forward, right? So farmers are overwhelmed with data today, and they don't know what to do with it. And just like any other human that's overwhelmed with tons and tons of data, like that's the other interesting thing about a farm is it throws off tons of information. And so we've gotten better at collecting some of that, especially remotely, or leveraging the other technologies that are there. But the big next step is turning that into actionable insights without, with minimal input from the farmer, right? So to be able to hand them something that says, here, like you said, turn on the fan for 8 hours in this bin. Like that's great.
Yeah, I'd love to go a little bit more into how each of your different businesses uses different technology at different points along the value chain. And can you each go into a little bit more, and we can start with Gabe, why the company took the approach it did, and then, who your end customers are and how that sort of like shapes the approach that your business continues to take.
Sure. So Cloud Agronomics, what we do, our primary focus today is actually measuring soil organic carbon levels in agricultural lands. And we do that using hyperspectral imagery, and we fly fixed-wing aircraft over croplands and grazelands to look at the reflectance of the sun. And when we break things up into that hyperspectral imagery, as opposed to, say, normal multispectral satellite or something, we get a much deeper level of insight. And so we're able to use the AI and analytics to come to a prediction about what the soil organic carbon is. The way we got there, want to sit back and spin a yarn. So it originally started by looking at permanent crops. So things like cocoa or oranges, and trying to see, is there a way to lever the hyperspectral imagery to get a better understanding of what was going on with those types of plants. As the world has kind of evolved, clouds looked at a number of different things, another big one being nutrients, so foliar nutrients. So being able to see in an actual leaf, like what are the nitrogen, phosphorus, and levels, things like that. But given where overall on a macro level, the world has recognized climate change as being a massive problem that needs to urgently be solved, I wish I could we were gifted in our foresight, but hyperspectral is actually super useful, among other things, at looking at soil and extracting how much soil organic carbon is there. So that's become our primary focus today, is very much in that space. So ultimately we got there by listening to our customers. Our customers are primarily large agricultural companies. So it could be the ABCDs, so ADM, Bunge, Cargill, somebody like that. It could also be large fertilizer companies, so Syngenta or Yara. And we work through them. We ultimately end up working with them on their programs with their farmer customers. And so we don't work directly with farmers. We partner in the measurement capacity of, say, a carbon program with those larger players in the grain space to help figure out how much carbon is in the soil, and going forward, how much that's changed.
I think Will, go ahead.
Yes. So using some of those analogies that Gabe mentioned, I mean, Hummingbird is really an MRI scan from space, and our customers are also enterprise B2B large agri-food businesses that are farmer facing. So, a classic Hummingbird customer might be a leading agro bank that's got 1,000 customers in Australia, and it wants to understand its credit risk. Those 1,000 customers are all farms, and we read those farms like a balance sheet from space. We will monitor how sustainable they are. We will also help those farms use less chemical inputs. So we're business facing, and it's all about those actionable insights. Maybe it's a commodity trading value proposition, maybe it's a chemical input saving, or maybe it's measuring sustainability. There has to be some P&L outcome that's derived from the imagery analytics. Just as a final caveat to what Gabe says, the sustainability unregulated carbon space is so quickly developing, and there are multiple different business models at play. So doing it on behalf of the government looks slightly different to doing it on behalf of one of the ABCDs to what it would look like for a food company. Data science and measurement is really the key to unlocking so much of it.
So talking about TeleSense, so we are basically want to be the single source of data to run a grain business more efficiently and make it more profitable. But it's more than that, because once you have the data on stored grain, and we're selling to ABCDs and large co-ops and even large farmers in Australia, in Europe, in US, who else cares about the data? The bank does. I just gave you a $2 million loan against your soybean. How's it doing? Is it in good shape? That's my collateral. But if I'm shipping a shipload from Brazil to China, I'm going to insure it. How do I price the premium? So this data on the quality and of the stored grain and the possibility of going bad is extremely useful. So we look at several parameters: moisture, as well as carbon dioxide levels, as well as temperature. And then we, based on that algorithms, we compute those numbers and give you those guidance. So the thing is, it's not just about preserving your grain, reducing spoilage, it's also making smarter decisions. Let's just assume you have wheat stored in 11 locations in 52 bins. You get an order for 5,000 tons of wheat. You only have to empty 7 bins. Which 7? Well, it's a complicated question. You have to know the quantity in each of the 52 bins, quality in each of the 52 bins, and the customer specs of what they want, the cost of logistics from each of the 11 locations, the availability of labor in all locations, and if you're lucky, future anticipated quality of each of the 52 bins 3 months out, 6 months out, 9 months out. If you knew that, you'll make a very good decision. Our job as a company is to give you the data so you make the smart decision and you eke out a few more pennies per bushel, because this is a tight business. Profits are tight. You have to rely on data, not just on your intuition. So that's what we're doing, making a smart grain operation and using multiple sensors and advanced software.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. So both Gabe and Will, you both, touched on sustainability a little bit and carbon markets as well. Probably starting with Gabe, can you go a little bit more into both, what cloud does and how that connects to carbon markets now and then particularly going forward, and what you think will happen there?
Certainly. When we take a look, like Will said, it's rapidly changing. The number one need fundamentally in that space is confidence. And it's in a couple different things. It's confidence that somebody is actually putting carbon in the ground. It's confidence that they're keeping it in the ground. It's confidence that the people who you paid are the ones that you thought were getting paid. And ultimately, those all are things served up as confidence that I'm doing the right thing, right? I'm achieving the outcome I'm trying to achieve, which presumably is helping, stop climate change, right? And then ultimately reverse it. So the first problem to solve there is the quantification of organic carbon. So until you actually have like a reliable confidence measurement, it's difficult to do anything. You need that at a minimum to understand how much somebody's put in the ground, but actually more importantly, given how relatively new, I would say the broader focus is on this, you need it to be able to help people manage practices. So a lot of the services that Will provides, help people understand like what the impact on their crop is, right? The different practices they're having, but we're new to looking at carbon across the field. And so we need space to be able to innovate, to try different things. It's unlikely the anecdotal versions of regenerative agriculture that have worked or been figured out to date are actually applicable broadly across whatever grain producing area we're talking about. And so by being able to measure the carbon, one, that again gives us an ability to generate a credit for a carbon offset, but more importantly helps drive innovative practices to understand what is the best way to achieve what your goals are, which are probably going to evolve into some version of not only pulling greenhouse gases out of the air, maintaining biodiversity of the ground you're dealing with, and obviously yield. Right? Today, the number one source of profitability for a farmer is the price they get paid for a crop. It's not quite yield. It's not the input costs. It really is that crop price. And so, things like sustainability metrics, when we start looking forward, I would expect those to start to get integrated into prices that people get paid for crops and probably be the bigger impact for a farmer than, say, a carbon offset. So, we're talking about corn going from quality, yellow number 2 to yellow number 3. I believe sustainability will ultimately be another quality score. And so farmers will be able to extract premiums based on the impact that they're having on the environment and potentially also experience discounts because of a failure to positively impact the environment. And so, organic carbon is one piece of it, but so is chemical usage, so is biodiversity, so is water usage, the list goes on. And so I think it's going to get more complex, but also far more lucrative, because consumers have demonstrated a desire to pay for people that are doing that good work.
Fascinating. In the spirit of some of what Gabe was saying, I mean, what Hummingbird is doing is incredibly complementary to what you just heard about. I will be a bit provocative though and say that we don't believe that you actually have to measure soil organic carbon directly itself for this to work. And the reason being is that we don't think that's going to be the case forever. But in terms of having a solid starting point now, we believe that it's enough for many people to measure various activities that are deemed to be sustainable and that science has accepted sequester carbon. Because the sequestration itself can take years and has huge variables in terms of climatic influence. So for example, in Australia, if it doesn't rain, you may get a carbon deficit, even if you're being really sustainable. So what Hummingbird's chosen to focus on are tillage detection, frequency and intensity, detecting the presence of cover crops, measuring biodiversity from space, and land use classification. Now, if you talk to someone like Nestle or Danone, what's their top priority in Latin America? It's preventing Amazon forest deforestation. That's the number one thing. If you talk to another global food brand in Australia, it might be something different. And in the Midwest, we all know about no-till and cover cropping introduction being really important driving forces. So Hummingbird is quite philosophical about this space, and we accept that probably a group of 5 or 6 companies will win together. We're just trying to measure those 3 or 4 things that are part of the narrative, whichever way you're looking at it. And how that interacts with modeling, trading, accreditation, government subsidies, and so forth is kind of for the industry to decide, or Indigo's marketing materials to decide.
So I was going to say that one of the things, maybe you're talking about some of the good things which are possible, but what worries me, if I can use the pun here, the data is so siloed. What's missing from this industry, we need to find a way to connect data from each other's application, the use of APIs, use of standards. I think that's the next thing we need to focus on, because the data being Hummingbird is producing is very relevant to what should be input to us, but there's no easy way to connect it. So what some of the organizations like IEEE did for standard was a very important point. USB as a standard, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth as a standard. So I'd like to hear from you guys. What do you think the lack of standard is hurting us? What are we going to do about this?
I would like to take a moment though and address Will's provocative comment simply because I do agree. So I think when we look at climate change overall, it's going to take a wide variety of actions across a wide variety of industries to fix that problem. However, in terms of greenhouse gases, right, I think what's grown up to date, and so Will was talking about something we would call geochemical models. So looking at, what's everything that happened around that land, and then make an estimate about the amount of greenhouse gas that it did or didn't pull out of the air. And I think that's all, that's reasonable for some pieces of it, but ultimately the problem we have to solve is pulling those gases out of the air. And so that is why I believe ultimately we will move to a more outcome-based structure, because it's not paying people to do practices. We're paying people to help, stop and reverse climate change. I do think those other things are relevant and still deserve credit, right? But I struggle to see a world where we're not paying people for outcomes. As far as data standards, I would agree with you. It's a broken mechanism. We'll also touched on it's hard to get access to data, period. And so I think, one of the things run into historically, I think, John Deere has a massive amount of data, right, for off machines, but at the same time, it's only as good as its collection methodology. And so I think one of the big struggles, again, that I think Will alluded to was in the field effort of collecting data. So every time a farmer runs a tractor, even if it's got sensors on it, measuring things, they actually need to get that to work right. They have to calibrate everything every time, which we know they don't do because they're humans like the rest of us, right? That's not, there's probably somewhere really far on the curve of farmers that might take that time, but most of us don't have the effort, don't have the patience, I would say, to go through that process every time. And so if we were to get to some sort of standard, I think it's going to actually have to come from some sort of remote solution, because we can't rely on the people operating the machines to do it. It's just not reasonable. And there's too many walled gardens in those places anyway.
Yeah. Speaking of kind of walled gardens, we believe that there'll be a sort of new business models that will help data exchanges, but there'll also be almost like a field ID or a farm ID digital footprint standard that will become almost like a tradable commodity. You know, imagine being in a supermarket and scanning a QR code and being able to see all of the inputs that went into that food production, like where it took place, all of the component parts. Like, we think that's coming. Just a signpost to listeners. You've got the traditional walled gardens of John Deere, Trimble, Climate, the usual suspects. No one's getting at that data anytime soon. You've also got new business models. So, for example, there's a business called TELUS Ag, one of our investors, but that is a multi-billion-dollar ag data business kind of in motion in terms of what they're trying to build. And connectivity and integration is at the heart of that. So what's interesting is that you have newer players, including Microsoft and others, who are trying to build the architecture wherein lots of this data exchange can happen. Yara and IBM would be another example. So it is coming, and the DevOps kind of software architecture is getting there to enable it. But you've still got an awful lot of data that are trapped with the big guys that I can't see being, released into the wild anytime soon.
Maybe the platforms like Indigo and Bushel, will they allow us to exchange data and consolidate, or is like plugging into Google and this is not practical?
It's an interesting question. I think consolidation itself is going to democratize the data, because people are realizing now that it's not just revenues, it's not just acres, it's the data underneath.
Yeah.
But it's I wouldn't want to say an answer to your question.
Yeah, I don't know either. I was just saying maybe Gabe does know something about this.
My knowledge of Indigo strategy has aged a little bit. But I think I think what will happen is there will end up being some sort of, Will, you talked about a couple winners here in the space, or consolidation leading this.
Yeah.
I think there will be some centralized repositories, and it might ultimately be driven by some of the farm management systems that lead to the democratization of data.
Yeah.
I will just share one thing that I worked on towards the end of my time at Cargill. For those listening, if you Google blockchain turkeys, we put whole turkeys around Thanksgiving on blockchain. That was an early blockchain experiment for a couple of years. But yeah, these things around traceability and getting the data more widely available, ultimately to the people that want to feel closer to the food. I think that it will be up to those consumer packaged good companies to pull things forward. I think that's where the biggest pull is going to come from.
Yeah.
And if at the end of the day, if the major supply chain players see value in exposing that data, then that will break down the walls.
Yeah.
There's another, just to be self-provocative, if that's even a word. What's cool about what Gabe's doing is that actually deletes the need for lots of data gathering anyway, because right now you've got farmers that report 100 pieces of information relating to indirect carbon sequestration, and they have to report it themselves. So Hummingbird's trying to come along and automate half of that or delete half of that. Gabe's trying to come along and delete all of it by just measuring the data at the source. So there's an element of, as technology advances, as deep learning models become more accurate, as sensors have higher resolution and so forth, the need for so much data might actually wane, because it's the right data, not just lumps of it.
And just to frame it so audience can understand the way I'm thinking about this, look what happened in the e-commerce industry. When we took the data of your credit card transaction, what are you buying? We matched that, what are you searching on the browser? You match that with the inventory and your SafePay loyalty card and the Amazon shopping. You combine all that and you're getting better targeted ads, more relevant pricing, and a smoother experience. So somebody took these different data points and cooked up the soup, which is serving us as a smoother e-commerce transaction experience. That needs to happen in ag. And that's, I think, we all sort of hinting in that direction, that is it possible? How far away is it? How life of a grower will change if that was all possible? I'm excited about that. A lot of opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to take that a step further and just see, how each of you think that, these trends that you're talking about and the potential consolidation at some level really will change the future of agriculture over the next decade, or even, the next 50 years.
Yeah, I mean, that's
Naeem,
what
if
I
you
was
want to go ahead and start.
Yeah, thank you. Those are the dots I was connecting. So see, if I'm a grower, if I knew through all this data talk to each other, grow this next to this crop, that's your cycle, store it this way, this is the best time to sell it, take the future contract now. If those data came to me in a way that is actionable, so my life is simple. So the way all this technology talks to each other is about simplifying our life and making it more productive and profitable. What is all the IoTs about? It's about my car realizing when not to bump into a car in front, go into stop and go traffic because sensors are talking to each other. My refrigerator ordering the milk automatically has my PayPal account. It knows where I shop. It knows when the milk is expiring. So this is the simplification we are looking forward to. Our technology will simplify our life. And I think there's a relevance here in the agricultural side.
I'm not sure how far away we are, and I would say I would lean on further. And the reason for that is back to this thing around it being a very physical world, right? So e-commerce is a helpful, I think, illustration. But when we try to take those experiences and apply them on farm, it is fundamentally different. It's interesting. I think every business thinks they're a relationship business. I think agriculture more so than anywhere else, because you're like that is the business of dealing with physical problems. And so, it's I have to go walk in a muddy field, right? and do whatever. I'm physically taking grain and driving it to an elevator. I need to believe that the person at that elevator is paying me a fair price, right? They're weighing my grain in a way that I believe, and all those types of things. I think it's going to be an incremental move there. It's difficult to transition to that, I would say, e-commerce world where it's highly transactional, simply because the relationships today do still matter. And you need to know that the person you're working with is going to be there when things are very hard, and like physically, literally be there, right? Not just emotionally and available on a phone, but literally be there in person to help me out. Pull a truck out of a ditch or whatever it might be. And I think that is an undercurrent of a challenge we face. The other big one is this translation from what I would call corporate America or in the U.S. anyway, to country. Right. And I suspect it's similar to a lot of other places. We see this a lot when new companies enter. They want big 20-page contracts on whatever it might be with agreement with farmer. Farmer wants 1 page. Right? That's what they're used to. And so today there's a lot of players that play that translation piece. So between the larger entity and the farmer themselves, and we continue to see the farmer get more and more sophisticated and more comfortable with some of those more complex agreements. But I think that's just going to take time to grow into, where the translation layers aren't as necessary, and those unfortunately have the added side effect of creating some of these walled gardens, right, and separating data. But it seems inevitable that they will go away.
the only thing I'd add, this is a positive point, is that if the question was put to us 6 months ago, kind of what's holding back ag tech, what's holding back adoption, I probably would have said with my sort of investor cap on that the sums raised are still very small. The number of competitors are still quite thin in areas, and critically, the lack of sizable exits is a turnoff. But in the last 6 months, we've seen some pretty important moments for the industry. You've seen kind of SPACs kind of take off and make lots of noise. You've got Farmers Edge's listing. Yesterday, we saw an Israeli business called Prospera get bought for $300 million. You've got everyone from Aero Farms to Alexandra Rate and all these sort of emerging listed entities. And you've got big tech are making moves as well. And then finally, you've got a much more international and sovereign investor base that have all realized that food security and tech go well together. Sorry for the siren. So there's now liquidity and capital behind the space, and there's M&A and consolidation that will accelerate that. So I would say that from a financial perspective, there's all to play for. And there are some really nice templates for new businesses to have as their sort of exit inspiration.
Yeah, I mean, you touched a little bit on the 6 months ago, you wouldn't have seen this. And there's a question from somebody in the audience talking about barriers a little bit. And if you encounter any, adoption barriers from your potential customers and, what those might be, and then how you think about addressing those. Yeah. I guess
I have a short answer to it. So we've been incredibly fortunate in the cloud because most of our customers have basically gone through their own sales process. So they go to start a carbon credit program. They realize they need to measure how much carbon's in the ground. They go to physically sample. They see that won't work. And then they try to find somebody that'll remotely sample. That doesn't work. Then they try the geochemical model and they can't get the farmers to give them the data. That doesn't work. And then they come knock on our door. So it's a pretty warm sale at that point. And we have landed in, again, serendipitously a very lucky, smooth spot in the sales process. So we've had a lot of luck working with our customers.
Naeem.
So we're talking about the friction with customers, or are we talking about?
Yeah. Do you encounter any friction with customers or people who you think are potential customers?
Short answer is yes, because we are selling to probably the world's most skeptical audience. So, like Gabe said, it's about relationship sale. You got to press flesh. You got to be comfortable because you've been farming for 100 years. Okay, you're telling me this new fang things. Prove it to me. But this is a normal process. So we end up doing lots of trials with 1 or 2 bins. When they see the result, when they see the convenience, then it expands. The promising thing is the new generation of farmers, the young people, are very tech savvy and enthusiastic about adoption. So I think Gabe mentioned that. I think Bill may have mentioned that. So I'm very hopeful that they are seeing the value and they'd love to tinker. They want to try things. So I'm hopeful that there's a trend emerging. That's why ag tech is hot. A lot of companies are getting funded. So we're finding that it's going to be slower uptake, but it's a deeper relationship. So my challenge is to getting my investor comfortable that this is not e-commerce. This is ag tech. Dynamics are different. Adoption will be slower, but it'll be deeper. The roots needs to go deep.
Then Will, I don't know if you have anything different.
Yeah, sure. So I think, look, we've unblocked the financial challenges. I think the technical challenges remain, which is kind of slower digitalization of the whole space, the big players having not really formulated a coherent or executed on a coherent tech strategy yet, siloed data lakes, possibly until recently, a lack of transparency and traceability across the whole chain. So it's interesting, in 2020, 2021, it's the first time where consumers are asking questions about soil health. People have seen the Netflix documentary. People are reading the books. There's that push and pull dynamic. It's all coming together. So I can't sort of say that the barriers were the same as what they were 5 years ago, which is kind of, it's agriculture, it's slow moving. I don't think that's necessarily the case anymore. It's possibly more subtle. But my closing comment on that question would be that all of the little things that amounted to a big blocker are beginning to unravel, and acceleration and adoption is kind of the consequence.
Yeah, I'd like to jump back actually to something Gabe had said earlier about, it is very relationship based. If your truck goes off the road, you gotta call somebody to help you out. You can't replace that. And so thinking about, do you think some of this technology can ever really replace boots on the ground?
I mean, it'll certainly replace some of it, right? But again, like, as long as it's a physical business, right, where people are doing the labor in the field, or at a minimum maintaining machinery in the field. I think at some point I saw a prototype of like using VR to run your tractors, right, remotely. Until we move to those types of things that are really like fully automated worlds, I don't think you'll ever get completely away from it, but I would expect a lot of it to go away. And in fact, maybe leave more time for those relationships, right?
I would say, just to jump in, that absolutely human labor cost savings is kind of what, in a not in an aggressive way, but is ultimately the ROI on much of what we sell. So we have a product called Supply Chain Vision that looks at very large land banks, perhaps belonging to a Bayer or a Cargill, where they find it very difficult to predict supply and supply chain movements during the season. So perhaps it's looking at every single planted acre of canola in Western Canada, understanding where it's at, understanding the growth stage, how much supply there will be. Ultimately, what we're doing is replacing groups of spotters that go around in cars and write things down on notepads. And then on a more micro level, when we do things like counting, sizing, grading, predicting harvest weight for stuff like lettuces, we're trying to prevent food waste and chemical wastage, but the byproduct of that is that you reduce the need for teams of people in the field doing it by sight. So I think it's an inevitable consequence of the technology, but it's no different to other industries.
Yeah, so I think my point is replacing is a high bar, but complementing, supplementing is where we're going. The biggest issue if you talk to farms is, in especially large co-ops, is the labor, predictability, availability, and cost of labor. So as you begin to do the data collection, actuation, using sensors and technology, your reliance on labor could be reduced. So it translates into better profits and lower pricing for food. So we are seeing a lot of that trend. And it's a slow-moving trend, but you'll see not replacement, but automation in all forms of whole food supply chain.
The only thing I'd add there is that with commodity sort of cropping, or broadacre cropping, or massive sort of livestock production, the human capital element tends to be quite slimmed down anyway. Like I don't know many farms, but it's not like they have random pockets of excess labor lying around. But where AI and automation will really make a big dent is in fresh produce, high value crops. So if I look at any of our customers in California, they hire huge numbers of seasonal workers, and that's a massive pain point for them because, you know, vaccines and visas and everything in between. So I think the higher the value within ag tech, the more you'll see a labor reduction as a consequence. That would be my prediction.
Well, I want to go ahead and thank all of you for joining. Gabe, Will, Naeem, great to hear from all of you. And for those of you listening, before I head out, next there's a panel on transforming agricultural trade and going into marketplaces. So thank you all again, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you.